I'm Jon Nappa. I'm the founder and executive director of Storm Warriors International. I want to give you a sense of where Storm Warriors has come from, how it's gotten to where it is today, and where it's going from here. This organization was founded while in the midst of my career as a writer and producer and director of motion picture and television entertainment and high-end corporate communications. I thought what I was going to do was venture into writing books or novels for teenagers. And in order to do this, in between my working projects, I had to research nautical terminology. So I found myself in an upstate New York book barn, 3 stories high and filled with old, rare, musty-smelling books. And I came across a book called Storm Warriors, or Lifeboat Work Upon the Goodwin Sands. It was a first edition, published in 1875, and written by the Reverend John Gilmore. Well, I thought it was just gold. It was filled with nautical terminology, so I bought the book, I brought it home, and I began to read it. But I discovered a story that would take me in an entirely different direction. Reverend John Gilmore lived in Ramsgate, England in the 1800s. And the men in that town, they were a hard, tough breed. They were all salty sailors. They were rough-edged men that had to provide for their families during the toughest of times, many of them the sole provider and barely scraping by. And they would go out fishing or they would go out hoveling, which meant they would scavenge wrecks and that sort of thing. But one of the experiences that all of Ramsgate shared was the witnessing of shipwrecks while they occurred, because right off the shore of Ramsgate, in the English Channel, was the Goodwin Sands, a shifting sandbar. Now, its edges are sand that shift and move and therefore can't be mapped very accurately, but at its core is the same chalk that comprised the cliffs of Dover. So it's quite devastating to ships that strike it in a storm. And when there is a storm, the Goodwin Sands cannot be seen. And so thousands upon thousands of ships were shipwrecked in that place. The people of Ramsgate could see these shipwrecks from shore. They could hear them. They'd see the tar barrels being lit as signal flares from the decks as they were breaking up, and women and children and sailors were thrown into the sea. But all they could do was watch and grieve as they witnessed the destruction of ship after ship, storm after storm. One man witnessed this from afar. He was a stagecoach builder from London, England. His name was Lionel Lucan. He was highly reputed and very wealthy. But when he saw this, he took it upon himself to go back to London and to use his team to try to come up with a technology that might have a chance in rescuing people who were struggling at sea in the midst of shipwreck. He came up with a lifeboat that had airtight fore and aft compartments and was therefore insubmergible, and he lined it with cork and fitted it out with tethers that could be tied to the lifeboat men so that if they were washed out, they could get back in the boat and continue their efforts. Well, once he built this technology and once he supplied this lifeboat, he arrived in Ramsgate only to face the next challenge. Who would get in the boat? And that was the question that went through my mind as I researched this story. What does it take before any of us are willing to risk our lives to help another? It was a question that took me away from my original intent of writing a young adult fantasy adventure series and really drew me into a process that would take a few years, and it turned into a modern historical work that researched the Storm Warriors story. I went to Ramsgate, actually visited the Goodwin Sands, and learned much about the history, about Lucan, about Gilmore, and about the people of Ramsgate and the shipwrecks that had occurred. And as a result, I wrote the book Storm Warriors, which was traditionally published in 2007. And the book did very well. And I was invited to speak at many different places around the country, in bookstores and book clubs. But something came up while I spoke at those places. People were asking me questions that I was not prepared to answer. Because in the afterword of the book, I invite the reader to consider that perhaps the metaphor of lifeboat and stormy seas and shipwrecks could apply to modern-day issues. In other words, the lifeboat really is your gifts, your talents, your calling, and the shipwrecks are the crises that are all around us if only we would look and listen. And the book inspired people to ask themselves, what will it take before I'm willing to apply my gifts and my talents, that is, my lifeboat, in service to those who are drowning all around me? What might that really take? I remember when I began to answer these questions with a little more research, it took the form of a newsletter that quickly grew into a subscriber base of over 10,000 people who wanted to know of modern-day places to get involved and to lend their services. But the more I reflected on it, the more I took it more personal and to heart than that. I began to think, or question perhaps is more accurate, what are my gifts? What's my talent? What's my skill? And really, my skill was storytelling. It was media. It was communications. I had done training and marketing and advertising and promotional work for corporate 100 companies. I had done entertainment for motion picture and television and for children's television, as well as for adults and for families. And I began to wonder, how could I combine that into some sort of effort to benefit others?